producer of Halloween Horror Nights here at Universal Studios Hollywood. And this is Monstrous 2, the Monsters of Latin America. Some of you guys were here last year when we did Monstruos, the Nightmares of Latin America. What I didn't tell you then, which I will tell you now, is that I always conceived this house to have a sequel. It was designed for that. But the determining factor was going to be the guests and how they received the house. This house was a fan favorite last year, so we decided to implement the master plan and move on to part 2. What I told my art director when we were starting this project, because we're still in the same cemetery that we were in for Monstrous, I told him it's like you pick up the camera and you focus on a different part of the cemetery, so that's what he's done in Scenic. Everything looks different. We're still in the same place. We're also bringing back the narrator, caretaker character, Muerte, which is interesting because it occurred to me last year when we finished. I was like looking back over what I wrote the previous year, and I was like, oh, I never actually said what his name was. Like there's no line where he says that he's Muerte, death. So I played with that this time. So he's going to be out front. He's collecting bones in a sack from his wheelbarrow and dumping them into the sack. And he's talking to you about the 3 Monstruos that are going to be featured in this house. But he's also saying, oh, you look familiar. I've seen you before. Do you remember my name? He keeps asking the guest, do you remember my name? Do you remember my name? And I'll explain at the end why that all makes sense. In addition to Muerte, we're doing 3 new Monstruos this year. We're doing El Charro, which is also known as El Charro Negro. The Dark Horseman or the Black Horseman. You guys familiar with that story? Yeah? I have to ask. Not, when we get inside, I'll explain which version of the story we focused on, because like a lot of stories, not only in Latin America but all over the world, there's so many of these myths and legends that are told orally initially, and sometimes it's hundreds of years before it ever gets written down. So there's lots of different variations of the stories. Sometimes in different countries there's different versions, sometimes within the same country there's different versions. So I'll explain when we get there which version of Charro we're doing. We're also doing El Cadejo. Do you guys know El Cadejo? Okay. Long and short of that is God created a white dog, which is like a spirit guide to help man lead a righteous life and find their way to the afterlife. But the devil got jealous, created a dog of his own that he sent to Earth, which is El Cadejo, which is a black dog with red glowing eyes. And he's one of the Monstros we're featuring in the house. And then the last one is El Cucuy, who's also sometimes called El Coco. That particular legend originated in Portugal, and then it came over in the colonial period of Mexico and then spread throughout Latin America. In essence, if you don't know El Cucuy is the boogeyman. He's the thing your parents, warn you about, or your grandparents, more likely in this situation. It's the monster that's hiding under your bed. It's the thing in your closet. So those are the 3 new monsters that we are focusing on for this house. So we go inside. Part of this is inspired by a particular graveyard in, I think it's Guanajuato, if I'm remembering it. Yeah. There's a grave where people leave little dolls and stuffed animals and stuff for the kids. There's also a place in Mexico called the Island of Dolls. Have you guys ever heard of that? It's become like a dark tourism site. It's outside Mexico City.
Wait, is that Tijuana? They have like the devil one?
No, it's outside Mexico City.
Okay.
It's the story is the man who lived on this small island. It's actually kind of like a man-made island. Apparently, one day a drowned little girl washed on shore, and he became convinced that he was being haunted by the spirit of this drowned little girl. So he started putting dolls up all over the island until he literally covered like the whole thing. You can look it up on the internet. It's one of the creepiest, freakiest things, because these dolls have been sitting there for decades, and they're all deteriorated. And
brownie points you're gonna give it that? Just say.
I've known about that for like at least a decade.
Have you ever been?
No, I've never been. I've always wanted to go. No, I don't know if I really want to go. Some of these things, it's just, and that's what I love about Latin American myths and legends is they're hardcore. I mean, they really are. And that's, over a decade ago, when we started doing Latin American myths and legends. Hello? I assume you have something to do.
Yes, I'm just verifying our check sheets.
You're good, thank you. Just making sure you're not a guest.
Can you imagine? He's like, sir, get out of my way.
I know. Well, our fans, you know,
Yeah,
even
hardcore.
before there's a construction wall,
Yeah.
you know, they're just trying to take pictures of everything. So when it gets to this stage, they're just like, yeah, they're just all over. This is all over the internet.
Yeah.
But kind of the way that Horror Nights incorporating Latin American myths and legends started was really organically with our fans. Well over a decade ago, people would just come up to me in the park and they would go, "Have you ever heard the story of La Llorona?" And honestly, my answer was no, because even though I grew up in Southern California, my parents didn't tell me that story. I'd never heard it. But I heard it enough times that it made me curious about it. So I started looking into it, and I was like, "Wow, this is crazy. This is a great story." And then I read about El Cucuy and etc. And so over a decade ago, we did our first La Llorona house, and it really it became a fan favorite. And so how this has evolved is now, I think of it as like a mini land within our theme park that is dedicated to Latin American culture and myths and legends. So we have the Universal Plaza over there, which is, you know, a celebration of Dia de los Muertos. We have the house here, which we've pretty much, coming out of the pandemic, have just been, this is the Latin American house. We take the street that the house dumps you into and turn it into a Latin American scare zone. So within the top tick of the park, that's a lot of real estate.
Yeah.
But to me, it's so appropriate for Los Angeles. You know, it's in the name, Los Angeles. Latin American culture is such a part of our community here in Los Angeles. So initially, it just was a way to deliver to the fans what they liked. Now, this day and age, I work with our DEI team, which is, of course, diversity, equity, and inclusion. So I do a ton of research on everything, whether it's movies, television shows, whatever we're doing. I'm going to research the heck out of it. It's the first thing I'm going to do. So I always sit down with that team and go, okay, here's the characters I want to feature, and here's everything I've learned about them. And it's visual research, it's written material, and the goal of that is just to make sure that we're being culturally appropriate, so that everything we're doing is authentic. So yeah, we just kind of borrowed the island of Doll, you know, it's just a little tidbit. But what Muerte's doing out here is he's telling you the story about this rich man and this poor boy. And there's a famous saying in Spanish, and I'm going to probably butcher it. I'll do it in English. It's rich or poor, the pieces all end up in the same box at the end of the game. I'm probably paraphrasing that badly. It's like in reference to the game of chess. It doesn't matter whether you're a king or a pawn. Everybody ends up in the ground at the end of the day. And I thought that was a cool line. So this script is written in both English and Spanish. So when Muerte's talking, it's a mix of English and Spanish. And then that's where we work with our DEI team to make sure all the translations are appropriate and authentic. And we're particularly trying to do Los Angeles Spanish. Because as you all know, if you live in Spain or if you live in Mexico, if you live in Southern California, Spanish is very different culture to culture. So being that we're in Los Angeles, we really focus on that. You want to go inside?
Yeah.
I had a question.
The house off, you're entering a crypt. So these are called mortuary packages. It's a specific way people were buried in Mexico, in a region of Mexico I found. I just thought it was an interesting look, the way they were wrapped. So you're going through this section, and we're going to set up the different monsters you're going to encounter the same way we did in the last year's house, where we create original pieces of artwork. They're kind of like crypt paintings or altar paintings. And I'll show you the first one down here when you're ready. We brought Horror Nights back in 2006, and he designs he does the drawings for all the performers, what we call characters. But he also does original pieces of artwork for us when we need them. So this is Lucas's drawing of El Charro. I basically write it and tell him, like, okay, I want El Charro on a horse at a crossroads, with the horse rearing up and him offering the bag of gold, etc., etc. And then he draws it up. So there's one of these for each of the 3 monsters that we're going to encounter in the house, and this is just to set up, okay, now we're entering the El Charro section, and then we go into the cantina. One I came across that I really liked told the story, and the name changes depending again on who's telling it. Sometimes the name of the guy is Juan, sometimes it's Jose, but the story is that there's a miner who has a large family that he has to provide for, and he works all these long hours in this mine, and on one particular night, instead of going home to his wife and kids, he goes to the cantina with his buddies, and he has a drink, and then he has another drink, and then he has another drink, and as he gets more and more drunk, he starts getting very boisterous, and his friends start kind of like, okay, time to go home, they start leaving him, till he's mostly by himself in this cantina, and at one point he just yells out, "Life is so unfair. Why wasn't I born, rich? I would give anything to be wealthy." And at that moment, in through the door walks a man in a dark suit, a mysterious stranger, sits down next to him and says, "I can make your dreams come true," in essence. I think that person is supposed to represent the devil, because in the other part of the story of El Charro, it's a similar kind of story of like wanting riches, getting riches granted to you, but there being a price for that. So in another version of the story of El Charro, he does something similar. He goes to his barn in the morning, and there's all these sacks of gold, and then he uses them to buy the finest clothes and the best food, and to have multiple girlfriends in all these different towns. But as he gets older in life and realizes the devil's going to come claim his due, he tries to flee, and he gets on his horse, and he grabs whatever sack of gold that he could carry with him, and he tries to outrun the devil, but the devil catches up with him, and the devil condemns him to hell and his horse. He sends his horse to hell too, which I thought was cool. But he because he's plucky, I guess, or tried to outrun the devil makes him a deal, and he says, "Every once in a while, I'll let you out of hell and you can roam the earth. And if you get somebody to accept your sack of gold, then they can take your place in hell." They don't say what happens to the horse, because the horse stays there. So El Charro usually roams, crossroads outside of towns at the dead of night, and he tries to offer people this bag of gold, and if you accept it, you're taking his place in hell. So we're kind of combining those two stories. Over there is the gentleman from the first part of the story I said. As you come in, it's lightning and thunder, and you're hearing him say, "I would give anything to be rich." And El Charro's horse, which is a big puppet on a rig, comes through. And then when he says that, El Charro appears in the doorway with his bag of gold, and he says, "I can make your dream come true." So it's just trying to set up that story. And then the next section's really tight, so I'll just talk about it. We could walk through it. But as you leave here and go into like the storeroom, all of a sudden you see all these bags of gold everywhere. And we were using little fiber optics to kind of make them, twinkle and stuff. And you keep hearing El Charro's voice, and he's like, "Riches beyond measure, more money than anybody could ever want." And then as you keep going, you end up in hell, and there's it's a blacklight environment, so it's all glow in the dark, and there's all these skeletons that are being tortured, and Muerte says, El Charro says, "The only price is your soul." So you know that this guy's going to get condemned to hell. And the whole time you're going through this pass, you're getting constantly attacked by El Charro. Each time he comes out, he's got that bag of gold that he's offering you, and his eyes glow. So we've designed the mask so that the eyes light up. Actually, all 3 of these monsters have glowing eyes. It's just the way the stories are. So all of them have illuminated eyes. So we'll go. So this is setting up the next of the monsters, El Cadejo. So at this point, from turning that corner and coming to here, you just get bang, bang, bang. El Charro, El Charro, El Charro. Then you step through the curtain and you walk right into El Cadejo. Which is these guys.
Oh, damn. Yeah.
Oh, wow.
You can make the mouth, open and stuff. Oh, look at it, it's drool. It's got little drool strands.
He's perfect.
El Cadejo.
Let me get out of the way so people can take photos. I'm sorry. I got my shot.
Crazy.
Yeah, so El Cadejo is all done with puppetry, so it's all puppets.
I think he bit you.
He's hungry. He has a saliva.
And there's a couple more of them.
Oh my god.
So that's the first one.
I
And
love
then
that.
as you continue,
That's
you
nice.
enter like a mine where that guy was working, that type of thing, and then all of the people who lived here or worked here are dead, and eaten by El Cadejo.
Very good.
Got his eyes on. Someone left his eyes on it. Last of the altar paintings is for El Cucuy. And this one we're changing it up. So you've seen 2 of them. Last year you saw 3 of them. So our fans kind of get trained, if you will. Like, oh, okay, this is just a piece of artwork. I can walk past this. This time we want to get them. So this is going to be printed, but it's going to be printed on like spandex material. So the performer playing El Cucuy could burst right through the middle of the artwork and get you. So, and then we go to a house, and the idea with this is, in the story of El Cucuy, like I said, he's the boogeyman. He's the thing under your bed or hiding in your closet. So it's Day of the Dead. It's Dia de los Muertos. It's the time of year where families invite the deceased spirits of their loved ones to enter the house, except somebody else shows up. He was not invited, which is El Cucuy. So up there you can see his bag on the roof. We're going to put a big figure of El Cucuy up there looking down at you like he's hanging out on the roof waiting to get into the house. And then the performer playing El Cucuy in the scene, when he hits his trigger, it's going to make lightning appear where the figure is. So you look up there and you see him, and then the lights go out and you just see his red eyes. And then the performer comes around the corner for the scare and then drives you into the house, which is when that performer hits their trigger, it makes a video appear, and it's the shadow of El Cucuy with the sack on his back going like this, and then when he gets to this point he disappears, and then the real thing comes out. So it's just a different effect. What always trips me out about scenes like this is a good example of props and dressing and all the work you have to do. First of all, everything is fake. So the bread looks really tasty, but it's all foam. These are all fake. Everything's fake. Yeah. I know that bread looks good. I would take a bite of that. But it's all
Sounds
The
good.
research you guys did to create the setting and everything, it reminds me of my grandma's house.
Yeah. What I ended up doing research-wise is the Library of Congress actually has an amazing database of this particular photographer, and this is going back probably 100 years. But it was a story that this journalist did on people who were migrating for the agricultural season in California. But what they were doing is juxtaposing what life was like in Mexico versus what life was like here. It was actually much worse here for them because of the living conditions. So there's all these great pictures of houses from that time period and what they look like and how they were decorated. So it was fun to be able to tap into that and use it as visual reference. Yeah. And then this whole section is pretty much paying off that kid's nightmare about El Cucuy. So as you go through the house, you're just constantly being attacked by him. Abuela, grandmother?
Abuela's grandmother,
Okay.
Abuelo's grandfather.
Yeah, so his grandmother told him the story of El Cucuy, sleep now, child, or El Coco will come and get you. So this is paying off the monster under your bed idea. So El Cucuy's already come. There's his sack with all the other kids he's stolen tonight. And then from under the bed, these giant hands come out. Big hands. I'll show you. You'll see there's another scene that uses those hands. So I'll show you how big they are. But that's all controlled by a performer on the other side of the wall. He's looking at a little video display so he can see where you guys are. You can't see him. And he just times it so that when you walk past, big monster hands come out of the bed. And then we're leaving the last part of the house and going to El Cucuy. Yes, thank okay, I know where it's coming from. It's coming from here, and then it comes from here or here. So this is a good example of that. There's a closet, the door's open. From an audio perspective, you're going to hear somebody's in here knocking things over. Lighting is making it look like somebody's in here. So we want you to focus all your attention. Okay, as you come around that corner, all right, something's going to jump out at me from here, but it comes from here. So it's just a simple example of how we did on Trejo. Danny was the voice of El Cucuy that year. And we did a scene like this where you went to his cave in the mountains, because what I love about El Cucuy is it's bad enough that he's hiding under your bed or in your closet, but he takes kids and shoves them in his sack, and then he takes them back to his cave in the mountains and he eats them. And that's what he does. So
Those marionettes are so classic.
yeah.
So classic Mexico. That's
Olvera
awesome.
Street, I'm sure.
Right.
I'm sure our prop people went to Olvera Street for that, because that's what they do. They go shopping all over the place. So you're going to his lair in the mountains. You get attacked by El Cucuy again as you're heading this direction. And then this is a bit of an original thing that we added to the story. And I did it back in 2013 when we did El Cucuy 2. In my mind, I was like, well, he's going to all these kids' houses and he's kidnapping all these kids. He probably takes some souvenirs, So he in our version, he takes their toys. He's like the Grinch, He just takes, I'll take that and this, and he has a whole collection in his cave of little kids' toys that he's stolen over the years. So as you're going through this section, there's two other performers that are like living dolls. So they're like a little boy and a little girl doll, creepy, and they're like a character version of the Island of Dolls, if you will. So as you go through, you get scared by both of them.
Yeah, no, of course.
And he wasn't here yet, so I called my makeup artist. I'm like, "Where's the giant El Cucuy?" And he's like, "I could be there at 4 o'clock." I'm like, "I'll meet you. Let's go." So we just showed up with a crew and just get it in before training.
I love the effect of the saliva. All of
Yeah, there's another detail. It'll be interesting to see if people notice this or not.
What? Oh my god.
Kids in his mouth.
Oh my god, no way.
What's even creepier is
Oh
that
my
when my
goodness.
makeup artist met me Friday and we were putting this in, I went, okay, so that means you had to cast the little kids' heads. When you do a casting of a head,
like
you have to get your whole face covered, and you have to. It takes a long time. It's pretty claustrophobic. You have to have like straws up your nose, and so you could breathe. And I said, well, whose kids are these? And he's like, they're mine. they were his sons. So I'm like, well, that's pretty cool. You use
So
your own
sick.
kids,
I'm obsessed
which
with
I would
that.
totally do. I've done that before. I've used my kids for stuff. Is he on? I guess he is on. Yeah, his eyes are on too. Yeah, these big nasty strands of gook.
Incredible.
So this is what we would call the final scare. You get to this point, it's pretty much a gauntlet of El Cucuy up to this point. You step through the curtain, this big beast comes at you, and it's usually that's the end of a house, but we have a little tag with Muerte in the following scene.
Do you mind if I take a photo?
The guy you met out front. He was asking you outside, oh, we've met before. See? Do you remember my name? Do you remember my number? Now here, as you come around the corner, he says, did you remember my name?
Death.
Muerte, death. And then he hits his trigger and comes at you with a shovel. So you're going to become the next person to be buried in the cemetery.
Last year there was like a gravestone that said you or
Yeah, I said to you.
Two.
Yeah.
Oh,
Last year
yeah.
I just said you. It was your grave.
Boom.
But this year you see him collecting bones out front. You're like, what does he do with those bones? This is what he's doing. He's giving himself a little, his own little wall. What's also cool is, and I think I mentioned at the beginning that we've kind of created this mini land within the theme park for Latin American culture. So as you exit here, you go right into a scare zone. And the scare zone theme is Luchadores Monstruosos. It's inspired by luchador cinema, particularly in 60s, 70s. It's its own genre that really only existed in Mexico. Doesn't really exist anywhere else, but it's... Do you guys know what I'm talking about, luchadors films? Famous Mexican wrestlers fighting monsters. And, you know, so Santo would fight Dracula and Frankenstein and the Mummy, you know, and they made a whole series of these films. And they're almost always like the Universal monsters, which of course they didn't get permission or anything. They just changed the look of them, you know. So we thought it would be fun to riff off of that in the Scare Zone by doing a hero pair, like a tag team of wrestlers that are also monsters, and they're fighting all these other monster wrestlers out on the streets. But it's not Frankenstein, but it looks a lot like Frankenstein. Mm-hmm. It's not the Wolfman, but it looks like the Wolfman. It's not Creature of the Black Lagoon, but it's evocative of him. So it's totally in the spirit of luchador cinema. And so there's some decor and set pieces that have been loaded in the park. We'll walk past as we go to our next place, which is a quiet place, right? Mm-hmm. Which is air conditioned, which is better.
Excited.
These things over and over and changes them and paints them. So that guy used to be a Yeti. He shaved him. He was in our Dark Christmas Scare Zone years and years and years ago.
No, not Disney.
He's been around. He's always been there. But he's always been a Yeti. So this year he cut all his hair off and made him a luchador. And I think that guy was in Holidays in Hell.
Oh my God. Leprechaun?
Yeah.
Oh yeah.
Oh
my gosh.
It's fun though.
And rocking out
Patrick's
the
pitched
Doc
me
Martens
this
on the other
particular
one.
Scare Zone probably 4 years in a row, and every year I was like, no, this is crazy. Like, not gonna do this, and then this year I went, you know what?
Yeah, why not?
Let's do it, and it's probably gonna end up being one of my favorite Scare Zones. Because I was out here with the cast on Friday night, and they're not wearing masks or costumes at that point. But as I went through their street and they were all doing their thing, I was going around going, oh, you're the Wolfman, you're the Frankenstein, you're the, you know, I could tell what character they were without anything on them, just because they tend to be veterans. The characters on the street tend to be people who've worked for us for a long time, and they just had come up with this whole choreography on their own. Like the way the tag team guys were interacting with each other, I was like, just do that. That's awesome. So it'll be fun. Okay, shall we go to the quiet place?